Alright, next step, adding more functionality to our character. We already have set up all the flip books to change based on if we're jumping, falling, or crouching, but we haven't actually told Unreal what any of those things mean yet. Unreal doesn't know what it means because even though we already can jump, and we could jump in the default project, the animation state never gets updated to jumping. So the flipbook for jumping never actually plays the animation for jumping. That's why the graphic never changes. So let's go ahead and do that. It's pretty straightforward. If you scroll down in your blueprint code to the existing jumping section, we're going to drag this window a little bit bigger. Maybe tighten these up a little bit. And we already have, when we hit the jump button, character jumps. This is making the character move up and down like it's jumping, but it's actually not. Nothing here is changing the graphic itself at this point. So while we can jump, we want it actually to look like Mario's jumping by changing the graphic to the sprite that we have for jumping. So remember that variable that we created for animation states, and we have the reference to it up here in the top, right here. We want to make it so when we hit the jump button, not only do we cause the character to jump, but we also set this variable to be a jump. And that's going to allow us to change the animation itself. So drag out the variable, and this time we want to go to set, because we are setting the animation state. You can go ahead and copy and paste that so we have two of them, because we're gonna want to change this when we land as well. When we land, we want the animation to change back to idle. Actually, you know what? I'll delete it. Let's just do one at a time so it's more clear for you. All right, so connect the output from the jump node to the input of the set node. We want this drop down to stay jump because that's what we're doing. And then we want to drag out from here and find a node called update animation. Update animation. So when we hit the jump key, our character jumps, and we also set the variable for animation states to jump. And then we update the animation. What do we update it to? We update it to jump. Then what happens is the code jumps up here because there's a reference for animation states. This animation states has been set to jump based on what we just looked at below. Goes into here, says, oh, what is the animation state set to? It's set to jump. All right, let's go and kick out to here. Set flipbook, what do we set it to? Mario jumping. Now let's try it. Let's see what happens. Hit the jump key. Yep, it jumps. And it changed the animation. Now we're stuck in the jump because, remember, I never told it to stop jumping. So that's going to be the next thing that we change. Right, escape out of that. We can drag out another reference from the animation states variable, set it again, but this time we want to set it to idle. When we stop jumping, we're going to go back to an idle state. So instead of connecting this to the stop jumping node, we're going to right click and we're going to get a default node that's built into Unreal called event on landed. So when our character lands on some sort of surface, in this case a platform, it's going to send out a signal and connect the output of that to the set, and then the output from the set idle to update animation. Okay, let's play this, see what happens. When I hit the jump key, it jumps. And pay attention to what's happening in the code right there. You can see the orange and yellow lines popping up and down. Watch what happens when I hit the jump key. You're going to see it come out of the jump action, into the jump, it's going to set the variable to jump, and it's going to run into update animation. Then as soon as I touch the ground and I stop jumping, I've landed, it's going to set that variable back to idle and update the animation. See how you can visualize that here? Cool. So now we can jump. We can jump, we can also move. We have those things set up. I want to set up a falling animation as well and a crouch. Well, let's do the falling next. So if we go to this middle section here on the right, it's currently labeled as a tick updates animation. This is where we're going to set up all the code for to determine if we're falling or not. So there's a little bit more math involved here, but it's fairly straightforward, and I'll show you how it's going to work. So I'm going to grab this and just move this stuff up a little bit. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag out here on the top left. See, it says character movement down the bottom there. Drag out that reference and drop it into your blueprint graph here, your event graph. That's going to be a reference to our character, because our character is the one that's falling. Next thing I want you to do is we're going to copy these two things here. We already have a velocity node here and this brake vector. Let's copy those. Let's bring those down. Let's connect the character movement to this. Just organize it a little bit better. Next thing I want you to do is to get a node called printString. PrintString is going to print this data to our screen. It's very useful for debugging purposes. This is going to allow us, in this case, to print our velocity to screen, so I can show you what's actually happening behind the code here. All right, connect this velocity right here, the yellow one, to this pink one on the print string. And then up here in the event tick, we're going to create a node called sequence here. A sequence it's basically a splitter. Think of it like a power splitter. You know, when you plug it into the wall, and then it has 5 outlets on it, so you're getting 5 outlets for one, basically. This is a splitter that allows us to split the signal into many different ways. And by adding pins, you can add more outputs. So let's have the event tick go into the sequence. Let's have the top one go into update animation so we don't break that. And then let's have the one output of the sequence go into the print string. All right. And this is going to print these values to our screen here. Let me play this. You see on the left side of your play window here, you have values for X, Y, and Z. These are all the axes that the character can move in. If I start playing this, let's see if I can click on it. Can't click on it while zoomed in. All right, there we go. Now I'll zoom in. If I start walking forward, maybe I can't do that while zoomed in. All right. Well, I can't zoom in, but if you look close, you can see these numbers changing as I walk forward. You see that the X values become positive values. As I walk backwards, the X values become negative values. This is the math that's actually controlling the movement of our character. And this is velocity on the X-axis right now. If I hit the jump key, my spacebar, you see the Z value changes. And if you look really close, when we jump, it goes from 0 all the way up to about 600, it seems like. And then it switches over into negative values. It's those negative values that we can leverage to determine if we're falling or not. Those negative values switch over as soon as we reach the apex of our jump and start coming back down. So all I need to do is mathematically ask Unreal, when is the velocity of our character on the z-axis less than 0? If it's less than 0, then our character's falling. If it's greater than 0, then we're not falling. Okay? Let's set that up. So we're going to create another new node called a branch. You may have seen a few of these branches around the code already, but this will be the first one we've created. So right-click, branch. A branch is basically a switch. It's, if this is true, send out a signal here. If it's false, send out a signal based on a certain condition. In this case, our condition is going to be, like we just talked about, is the z-axis less than 0. So we need to create a less than sign. So you grab onto this z. I like to grab onto this node here because there's all sorts of different less than nodes that we can get. But if I grab onto this here and drag it out, it's going to narrow this down so I select the right one and I don't get an error in my code. Right, what am I looking for? Less than. So I can do a less than symbol on my keyboard next to the M key on your keyboard. Less than or equal to? Let's just do less than. Right, so if our velocity on the z-axis is less than 0, we want that condition to go up into the branch. And if that's true, if it's true that our z-axis is less than 0, meaning it's a negative value, if that's true, then we're going to want to change our animation state. Remember, animation state is the thing that's driving all of this stuff. This is determining which flipbooks play. The current state of our animation state determines what the switch switches to, and that determines which flipbook plays. If that's true, then we're going to want to set our animation state to falling. So go over to the left and drag out your animation states variable again. We are setting it, and we only want to hook up true. The animation state is, if the velocity on the z-axis is less than 0, we are setting the animation state to falling. So click the drop down, click on falling. And then the branch needs an input as well, so you can just drag the output from print string to the input of branch. And let's see what happens. So I'm going to compile this, save it, play, move this out of the way a little bit, hit the space bar. Yep, it looks like as soon as I start falling, it switches to the falling animation. Cool, that's exactly what we want to happen. If you look at the code down bottom, the path of the code, you can see that on the bottom line here, this is constantly running in, and it's asking, is z less than 0? Well, if I haven't jumped, then no, you can see here z is 0. So if z is not less than 0, that means it's false, right? So you can see that this orange line right here, the signal is getting blocked by this branch, because until I jump and start falling, this is false. Why is it false? Because the z velocity is not less than 0. It's 0, but it's not less than 0, so it's false. And right now, false isn't outputting to anything. We don't need it to output to anything right now. I guess you could if you wanted to, but again, that would determine what you're trying to do with your character. For right now, this branch is only going to actually kick out a signal to change this animation state if the velocity is less than 0. If that's true, set the animation state variable to falling. Then when the animation state is set to falling, the animation state up top here becomes falling. The switch asks, what are you? It's falling. It kicks out to the flipbook that plays the falling animation. Cool. So that's all set up. If you wanted to get this data off your screen, the reason that's there is because we did the print string. The print string is useful because it allows you to debug the values. But if you wanted to hide it or something like that, you can just click on the drop down for print string right there, and it says print to screen. Just check that box and collapse it back, and it won't be there anymore. You could just delete it and wire everything up again, but I like to keep it there while we're working in case we need to debug and go back to it. I'm going to select all this stuff up that corresponds to the fall. This little batch of stuff right here. And I'm going to hit the C key on my keyboard. C is a keyboard shortcut to create a comment. And staying organized, I'm just going to call this determine if falling. Cool. So the next thing would be to do the crouch. So we have to set up the crouch. If I right click here and just type crouch, there's no input action that I have for crouch. So I have to create that. If I go back to my level, go to settings, go to project window, like I had showed you before where the jump was set up, we scroll down and go to input. I want to create a new action mapping right here. Click the little plus and collapse the jump. I'm going to call this crouch. So we're creating this new input action that's called crouch, and I have to assign it to any number of keys. So in this drop-down box right now that says none, I have to change this to what I want crouch to be. In this case, I'm going to select the C key, C for crouch, because I use WASD, and I'll add another one on for control. I can just type that in. Yeah, left control sounds good to me. Maybe you'd want to do right control if you're using the arrow keys instead of WASD. Once you have that set up, now we've told Unreal we have this input action called crouch, and we're defining it as whenever the user hits the C key or the left control key. If you wanted these to be different buttons, you could put different buttons. I'm going to close this down. Now would be a good time to save. Control-Shift-S. Now if I search for the crouch, check it out. Now I have an input action event for crouch. The only reason that's there is because I told Unreal to put it there. That's what we just did in the input project settings. Okay. Let's do that down here, I guess. So let's, in this empty space down here, let's just right click, type in crouch. We want to get the input action for crouch, the action event. It's going to be red. Looks just like the jump ones. It's very, very similar to them. All right. Next thing we need to do, there is a default node in Unreal called crouch. It takes your character and makes it half height, so they're crouching down. It's right here, called crouch. We also need to get another one called uncrouch. And then we need to wire these up. So when the crouch button is pressed, crouch. When it is released, uncrouch. Another thing that we need to do is we need to go into our character itself. So if you click on character movement in the top left, we need to tell Unreal that this character is capable of crouching. You can scroll through all this stuff here, but since we know what we're looking for, we can just type it up top in the details. Just type in crouch up there, and you'll see a section called nav movement. It says can crouch, the checkbox here. We want this character to be able to crouch, so check that box. Okay, let's see what happens. Hit the C key, I crouch, but doesn't switch the animation, so we need to do that next. How do we do that? The same way that we handled everything else. Remember, we had to set the animation state variable to what we were doing. In this case, now we need to set it to crouch. So let's grab our animation states variable over on the left, drag it in. We are setting it. So when we crouch, we want to click the drop down, pick crouch. We want to drag the output of the set crouch up to update animation. These can all share the same update animation node, that's fine. And then when we uncrouch, we could drag this up to, and let's stay more organized. Let's drag the animation states in again. Set, let's make this idle. Wire this up, wire this into update animation. So when we uncrouch, we go back to idle. Okay, let's try this. Hit the C key, we crouch. And you can see the code playing itself out down there on the bottom, the signals coming out of the crouch action. It's working. Cool. Now there are a few bugs here that you'll realize. If I jump and I hit the C key, look at this kind of weird flicker that happens. If I hold down the C key and I hit the space bar, I get stuck in the ground, which is something that I don't want to happen. So we're going to have to put in some more code here that eliminates this problem from happening. And that's the next step. The next and last step. This is probably the most tricky part that we've done so far. All right, so we need to fix the crouching bug. So we don't want to be able to jump if we are crouching. So in order to do that, we need to look back up at the jumping section. Basically, I want the code to say, if you're currently crouched, if you're currently holding down the C button, don't allow the character to jump. So let's do that. Let's drag in a character movement reference because that's what we're referencing. Let's drag off from character movement, and there's a node called isCrouching. So if my character is crouching, send out a signal from that, or get the current state of that, yes or no, true or false, are we crouching or not? From the isCrouching node, let's get a branch. And this is going to allow us to send out a signal based on if we're crouching or not, if that's true or false. And instead of having the input action when we hit jump send out a signal to immediately jump, let's disconnect that. Actually, we do it for the touch one too. And let's toss these up into the branch now. And only if we are not crouching are we going to allow it to jump. Okay? If we're not crouching, then we can jump. Let's try it and see what happens. Just to the side. Crouching, can I jump? No. You can see when I try to jump, it goes up into that branch, and as long as I'm holding down C to stay crouching, I can't jump. Because it only is going to allow me to jump if is crouching is false. If I'm not crouching anymore, now I can do it. Now I can jump. And now you can see that that branch is actually kicking out its value into the jump itself. Cool. Well, now I don't want to be able to crouch while I'm jumping. Let's change that. It's very similar. This time we also need to get a character movement node. We need to get a node. Remember we did the is crouching. This time we're doing is falling. We need to drag out, get a branch, determine if that's true or false. We need to, let's move this stuff around a little bit. Let's move this up here, just to get a little bit organized. Let's pull this down. And we're going to have to disconnect this crouch right here. When we hit the crouch button, we want it to ask if we're falling or not first. We need it to run it through this condition and ask if that's true or false before we actually do the crouch. All right, so let's plug this output from crouch when we press the button, and we're falling. If that's false, then we can crouch. Let's try it. All right, I jump, and I try to crouch, and I'm not allowed to crouch. No more bug. No more falling through the floor. No more weird flickering on the character when I try to crouch while I'm jumping. I can move left and right. I can jump around. If I fall down here, I'm falling. We have the beginnings, or maybe even a little bit more than the beginnings, because we've done a lot with our character here, of some sort of game. No, that's unplanned for. When I hit my head off the bottom of this platform, I start falling right away. Makes sense. Some things you get for free, which are nice. The next step would be world building, bringing in custom graphics, starting to think about any sort of interactivity in the level itself, moving platforms, triggers, that sort of stuff, which is all things going forward in the next lesson.